Today I'm going to do my summary and review of the book that I've been reading, The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. Escape 9 to 5, live anywhere, and join the new rich. This is a good example for me of a book that is outside of my normal comfort zone and has things that I would probably feel like don't apply to me. And even within the subtitle, I don't really like some of the wording. I'm not that big a fan of, but I am interested in this escape the 9 to 5 part. And one of the strong points of this book, and I think part of what made it a bestseller, is the fact that it asks a lot of questions about things that most people take for granted. So the basic theme of this book is that, and I'm going to quote a little bit here, paraphrase a little bit here, is that reality is negotiable. And so it's a lot about being intentional and trying to design your life and your life's work, which are things that I'm definitely interested in. And so he also coined the term lifestyle design, which I think is sounds a little bit cheesy and is overused on Instagram these days, but is actually a very interesting concept and at the basis of living a happy life. And so he really goes into a lot about how to make money without spending all of your time doing it. And in that way, he is questioning the idea of just working harder, or sort of this Protestant work ethic that is so prevalent, where the assumption is you just work harder and you just keep working. His book is more, how can you work smarter? And I really like that part about it. So, for example, relative income is more important than absolute income. So how much you're spending relative to how much you're making is more important than just making millions of dollars, because you could be spending a lot of money too. So I'm going to go through and read a couple parts that I really liked from this book. So he has a lot of things in here that are like worksheets or Q&As, and a lot of activities that you can do. And he has also on his website, he has spreadsheets to go with a lot of these things. So for example, he has this whole concept of dreamlining and how to come up with ideas of goals that you have, things that you want to do, places that you want to go, things that you want to buy. And on his website, he has this in a spreadsheet that you can use in Excel that does a lot of the math for you. Those are very useful things. And so I also tried listening to this on audiobook, and it's not that great on audiobook. I ended up not listening to very much of it that way. He has a really interesting concept in here about the low information diet, and I think this is something that is also very powerful because he's questioning assumptions that most people take for granted. And a lot of people that I know, they listen to the radio all the time, they're reading about current events all the time, and they take pride in being knowledgeable about current events. And sometimes I feel like in the past I've felt like guilty, like in the last 5 or 10 years, I haven't really stayed on top of current events. And so I felt a little bit bad about that. And here he has a whole thing about how that is actually potentially a really useful strategy. A great quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson here. There are many things of which a wise man might wish to be ignorant. Very good. And then here's another quote, a little bit more heady of a quote. What information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, and a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources that might consume it. That's a quote by Herbert Simon, recipient of Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics and the A.M. Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. So I think that's really interesting to think of what we're not just consuming information. Information is consuming something from us, and that's attention. And have have we any issues with attention these days? I think we do. And so having so much information available to us is part of what is causing our attention deficit. So anyways, that was just an interesting point. And there's lots of little gems like that in this book. Some really interesting stuff about how to eliminate unnecessary things. He talks a lot about the 80-20 principle. He talks about, and the 80-20 principle should really be a household term. And as you go about your planning and strategizing, you need to be aware of the 80-20 principle. Another principle that people should be aware of is this concept of batching. And like a batch of cookies, you don't bake one cookie at a time, you bake a whole batch of them. And so batching is when you sit down and you do all of your email work in a 30 to 1 hour chunk, maybe once a day, instead of just checking it at a bunch of times during the day, which is extremely inefficient. So batching is something that I had heard of the word, and he talks about it a lot in here. I've heard of the concept, but that's something that everyone should know about. Here's a great one. He talks a lot about automation and how you can create a small business that is automated and is doing the work by itself without you constantly needing to get involved. And so there's a really good quote in here about Bill Gates where he says, "The first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second rule is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency." So another little gem from this book, there's lots of things like that. And even if you're not an entrepreneur or not planning on doing this whole plan that he has for how to escape the 9 to 5 and become the new rich. I don't really like that term, but even if you're not planning on swallowing this hook, line, and sinker, there's these little tidbits that I feel like are applicable to anybody's life. And it also works as sort of like a reset. Even if you're not planning on doing this, reading a book like this can make you realize, oh, I have options. You know, like if I really needed to, I could apply some of the stuff in this book and get out of Dodge and go live in another country and pursue the dreams that I have. So that's another reason why reading a book like this can be really useful. So don't be to be aware of your inner critic. Your inner critic might be like, oh, that's not for me. Oh, the new rich, that's so, oh, I don't like the way that sounds. And just, you could, totally tear this whole thing up in a critical way. And it's good to have some critical thinking when reading stuff, but at the same time, reading this and just being aware that there are strategies like this can help you know that there's other options out there, and that can be a really liberating feeling. I'm not going to go that much into the technical business stuff. He does go into it. Oh, this is a really good part. How to become an expert in 4 weeks. It talks about just the basic ways that you can build credibility in a subject. Okay, here's a good quote. And this is, I always like to offer a pairing. So I recommend one thing you could read with this book that would be fun would be to read Machiavelli's The Prince. And I feel like that is a book that has, Machiavellian is an adjective used to describe someone who's scheming and all of that. And I think that has a negative connotation, partly just because of our Protestant work ethic, supports this idea that a good person is someone who just works hard, but works stupidly. And so anything that is more strategic is often, looked down upon. And we have a lot of negative adjectives to describe the people that operate in that way. And so anyways, I was thinking that even before I found this quote from Machiavelli in his book. So Machiavelli says, "All courses of action are risky, so prudence is not in avoiding danger, it's impossible, but calculating risk and acting decisively. Make mistakes of ambition and not mistakes of sloth. Develop the strength to do bold things, not the strength to suffer." So I think that's really interesting. Some people have a lot of strength to suffer, and they just keep doing the same thing over and over again and often complaining about it, but not really being decisive or making any decisions that can help them get out of that situation. There's humor mixed in. Some of the humor is not that great, but there's some pretty good ones. There's a funny Mad Lib even in this part. Ooh, here's another really good quote from Jules Henry. I'm not sure who that is, but he says, "Human beings have the capacity to learn to want almost any conceivable material object. Given then the emergence of a modern industrial culture capable of producing almost anything, the time is ripe for opening the storehouse of infinite need. It is the modern Pandora's box, and its plagues are loose upon the world." So I thought that was very interesting, and it makes me think about social media, for example, on Instagram, where you could follow people who are doing all these amazing things and who have all these amazing things. And when you see that, it can make you want those things. And so we're exposed to so much stuff. And when we see it, we're like, ooh, I want that. And just the idea that human beings have the capacity to learn to want almost any conceivable material object. That's pretty deep. So the book has an interesting combination of, like capitalism and like Buddhism, Stoicism. And so I think that's very interesting. There's a lot of resources, like he has links to all these different things. Like this one looks interesting to me, this virtual tourist one. And some of them, it's a little bit old. This book is from 2006, I believe. And so there's a lot of like hyperlinks that is a little bit, people don't really put those full hyperlinks into books anymore, but you can tell he did a lot of research, and there's, some amount of bravado, and it has some like amount of machismo in it in some parts, but overall I think it's a pretty great book. It's a really good book if you're stuck in a job that you're not enjoying, and this could just give you the feeling of like, yes, you do have other options. And for people who are interested in traveling, this book would also go really well if you combined it with the book Vagabonding, which is one of his recommendations. He has a whole list of recommended books in the back and other recommended resources. So I do recommend this book, especially if you get it from the library like I did. It's probably pretty cheap. Also, I don't recommend it as an audio book. However, so yeah, I recommend getting the hard copy. I got it from the library. That's why I actually have to do this video today and return it because someone put in a request for it. So I'm going to take out all my sticky notes now. All right, so yeah, check out this book, and I'll have more videos coming soon.